I am Doomsvince, and this is day 119 of Spawn Year.
Today, when the television appeared again, I was ready for a nice change of pace. I've been thoroughly enjoying Sam and Twitch's hard-edged crime stories and dreading the inevitable return of the sprawling, maddening, never-ending non sequitur that has become Todd McFarlane's Spawn. But I've seen advertisements in some of these comics for the animated HBO series and other video games besides the one for Super Nintendo. After the SNES game was surprisingly solid and enjoyable, even if failing to finish it led to my playing the plotting and headache-inducing board game and my one real win awarding me a prize that was really nothing of the kind, and after the movie was not good, but a better medium for the material and oddly light years more fun than the comics have been, though I enjoyed it sizably less on each of the 7 repeat viewings Doomsvince forced me to sit through after my critique that day. Even if the subject is Spawn, a character I've been given far more reason to despise than favor over these many months, I'm beginning to think he translates to other media better than he works in long-form comic storytelling, and that perhaps creators working in those other realms have better ideas for him. I've only been disappointed by one of those 3 forays into non-comic book Spawn, and in the immortal words of Jack Nicholson in Mars Attacks, that ain't bad. Sure enough, my task today was to play another video game, with another challenge from Doomsvince. This time the stakes were entirely straightforward, and for the first time I had the opportunity to influence my topics for review over the coming days and weeks. If I made it all the way through this game in a single sitting, I could continue reading and reviewing Sam and Twitch. But if I failed, starting tomorrow, I would return to the main Spawn title. There's no way this prize was another punishment in disguise, unless the next arc of Sam and Twitch was post-Blood Feud level awful. I confidently welcomed the challenge. Having nothing to lose, I picked up the newly provided controller and I got right to work. The game in question was an original PlayStation title called Spawn: The Eternal. Apropos, because the 3 hours or so I played the game seemed like an eternity. But I doubt the title intentionally refers to the game's monotony. Clearly, it isn't so self-aware. It thinks it's edgy and adult, and something proudly unwholesome your parents don't want you to play. Like the comic, it has violence and blood, and it even hints at sexual themes. You won't see that in Banjo-Kazooie. Look, our game is for mature audiences, because this control room has a poster of a barely dressed swimsuit model. Unless that's a lobster. A lot of 3D adventure games on the PS1 looked like this. Pixelated walls, poorly detailed environments, objects that don't quite look like they're really there. My favorite in this game are the sewer pipes. Does this sewer have plumbing, or did someone paint those there? It looks about as tangible as the graffiti. And also, like so many of these sort of games circa 1997, there are plenty of glitches in the environment, walls you can see or walk right through. There's an area early on where I got to the end of a warehouse and found myself looking out at the city I was in before I entered that building. I thought it was just some secret passage, but more secret than I had ever imagined, because when I turned around, a wall appeared. If I backed up, I walked straight through the wall. Why is there an invisible wall here? Come to think of it, what's with the surreal look of this game in general? In the city and in all 2 buildings there you can enter, everything looks dilapidated and abandoned, with rust and mold everywhere, or at least rust and mold patterned wallpaper. And the sky in each area is a different shade of flowing liquid-like substance that looks like an old Power Max screensaver, or the confrontation with Zool at the end of Ghostbusters. Where is everyone, and why is this whole freakish world populated with just a couple dozen mob thugs and 3 supervillains from Spawn comics? In theory, it's basically the Super Nintendo game, but in 3D. You walk through levels beating up bad guys, you fight bosses, and you have special powers that are immensely helpful in battles, but you have to use them sparingly and strategically, because they drain your energy, indicated, again, by the spawn clock. The first 3 main bosses even appear in the same order as the last game. Overkill, who you have to fight twice again, Redeemer, who is exactly the opposite in terms of difficulty from his SNES counterpart. He's the only boss I defeated my first time out and in less than 30 seconds, and Violator. In practice, this game gets everything wrong the first game succeeded at, which is baffling the more I consider what it ripped off. I suppose it is truer to the comics in that very little is happening most of the time, and whenever I start to think things are beginning to pick up, what little action there is mindless, pointless, and just a brief reprieve from the Dullsville I'm swiftly returned to. I put the word adventure in quotation marks before because there's so little of it. Is there a classification I don't know about for games where one wanders around aimlessly until something finally happens? See, it's exactly like a Spawn story. In each stage, you simply walk around, usually exploring hallways and corridors, fighting the occasional enemy and collecting orbs, until you get to the boss, find a portal, and transport to the next area. There's little reason to bother with the majority of a given area once you know where you're going. The trouble is, each stage is riddled with dead ends and completely useless rooms and passages, many of which are just there to provide one enemy to drop some of your health, and with little to no reward for your trouble. If I'd known there was nothing of value in these places, I'd have left well enough alone, except half the time you have to go there just to figure out you're not supposed to go there. Some of this would be okay, walking down lingering halls to create suspense and anticipation for horrors to come, but in only one stage did anything unexpected happen, when debris fell from the ceiling in the subway, and it was so out of nowhere I smashed my hand against a tombstone. And there's always one place where a key or a gear or something is necessary to advance, and inevitably, I'd cover practically every inch of a stage before I finally found what I needed to move on. If the game were generally more about puzzle solving, this would be okay, but as it is, the puzzles are simple but tedious, and most of the time there's nothing to keep my interest but the occasional thought, which is a simple matter of dull button mashing. And there's also crates, benches, phone booths, and other random objects to destroy, often with nothing at all inside of them. Sometimes I would be so tired of lumbering around the same drab areas looking for the next section I'd just break things in frustration. Maybe that's what they're there for. It's what Spawn would do. The SNES game made me feel like Spawn in a cool way. Look how powerful I am, and how hard these seemingly endless and astonishing abilities are to control. I feel like Spawn here too, but in an infuriating way. Look how bored and increasingly impatient I'm becoming. I have no plan and no resourcefulness or cunning, so I guess I'll just wander aimlessly until things happen and then impulsively hit things and people who piss me off by virtue of being there. God, somebody just hand me a gun so I can put myself out of my... Anyway, the combat system is a bafflingly odd choice. This one is not a beat-em-up. When you meet a thug or a boss, it suddenly morphs into a 2D fighter, Mortal Kombat style, and suddenly all the buttons do different things and you can't jump. This is also the only time Spawn's cape manifests, and it serves no purpose except you can make it disappear if you're totally in love with seeing Spawn with no cape after seeing it for so long already. I guess the programmers were too lazy to animate it in the 3D sections. Now, I realize exploring 3D rendered environments was still something of a novelty at this time, and I can at least make out what everything is supposed to be most of the time, but this game is relying solely on that novelty, like art over story in a lot of Spawn comics. Like, I'm supposed to be so enthralled with being able to move in more directions than just left or right, I don't need creative level design or, stuff to do to keep me interested. There's a cubbyhole with nothing in it! Why is that there? There's an entire restaurant I could just skip if I want to. No reason at all to enter. And I know that because when you die, you start the entire stage over. Another misstep compared to the last game. If I want to try a boss again, I have to remember what 3 or 4 rooms I actually need to enter and avoid the others. Unless I really need orbs. They're few and far between, but they're the only reason to ever explore anything beyond the essential areas in these bland and uninspired labyrinths. These aren't even designed like adventure levels. They're like empty multiplayer shooter stages, like Quake arenas. If the idea was to walk around shooting people, these places would be quite appropriate, if not a little small. And that sounds really fun compared to what I've been doing. Wow, that would be a fantastic premise for a game based on Spawn. Anyway, screw those stupid orbs, because I used what little of them I found without looking very hard, was constantly penalized for it, and ultimately lost the game for using up my power prematurely. Why do you need to collect items to use powers you should have already and then drain precious energy for spending them? That would be like if you got a job and your boss gave you $10,000 up front, told you you'd be fired when your $10,000 was spent, then took part of that $10,000 from you whenever you cashed your paycheck. It's counterintuitive, it's unfair, and it makes no sense. Imagine Superman having to look around for little S symbols or crystals or something whenever he needed to fly, and then drain solar power he'd conserved already. So I drained my power very quickly because I was trying to avoid having to start the level over after I died. A lot of that power went toward replenishing my health whenever a thug or boss depleted my life gauge. I couldn't help but take damage. Sometimes enemies are easy, and sometimes they block like crazy and get raging mad like they're angry for being in such a terrible mess of a game. And the controls are insanely stiff, especially in the 3D sections. Most of the time I found myself walking forward, then turning, and then walking again. I think Doomsvince gave me a PS2 for this, just so I'd long for the ability to use the joystick even more. Ironically, I made it about the same place I got to in the SNES game before I lost. Hell. Which you go to, not kidding, because you defeat Violator. In the only cutscene and the only moment resembling a story I got to see, Bulgy cracks up while watching Spawn fight Violator, like he's looking at the video game, complete with life bars and everything, and sends you to hell. Is that the plot? Malbolgia traps Spawn in an actual video game? After solving the oh-so-clever riddle of stand in front of the only door that actually opens, I was suddenly medieval Spawn, with the same depleted Spawn clock. What? Did Al Simmons turn into medieval Spawn? If not, then why are they sharing a clock? So, starting tomorrow, I'm back to the main Spawn series again, adding insult to injury. That's okay. I'm not sure getting back to Sam and Twitch would have been worth suffering the entirety of this game. So, 2 out of 4 non-comic Spawn media have been worth experiencing. And that is pretty bad. Signed, Captain Logan.